The Prepper Podcast, Episode 9.
They've got to know whether or not their president's a crook.
The American people would never vote for socialism. He said, under the name of liberalism, the American people will adopt every fragment of the socialist program.
The Prepper Podcast is an up-to-date survival podcast based on military, wilderness, and modern-day survival and may be found at theprepperpodcast.com. I am Ken Jensen, the host of the show, and this is the podcast about everything survival. This is Episode 9, and today is going to be a little bit different, guys. I'm going to give you the story of Thanksgiving. This is a special Thanksgiving episode, and I'm trying to make a pretty decent recording so that I can use this in years to come. On Thanksgiving, I am going to give you the real story of Thanksgiving, not the one that you learn in the textbooks. Hopefully, on Thanksgiving, since I'm recording this a few days ahead of time, I'll be able to get you guys the story delivered to your inbox so that you can let your children listen to it. I'm going to try very, very hard to make this family friendly, so that you guys can teach your children the true story of Thanksgiving. You may find this podcast at theprepperpodcast.com/009 for episode 9. I will have all the show notes there. Let's get started. Some quick housekeeping, guys. I would like for every one of you wonderful listeners and wonderful audience members and wonderful community members to look me up on iTunes and give me a 5-star review. When you give me reviews and you give me comments on iTunes, it will bring my podcast up in the rankings, and it will make it easier for other people to find it, and then I can reach more people with my message. That is all I'm asking. I'm not asking anything else from you. Just give me a review, give me some comments, so that other people can find this podcast a lot better. You can also go to Stitcher Radio and find my podcast there. I have many other places, but I can only, I'm just going to name the big ones. You can always go to theprepperpodcast.com to find all the other places that you can find my podcast. It's going to be in the top right-hand corner of my website. Now, if you want to find my podcast on iTunes, if you go to theprepperpodcast.com/iTunes, or if you go to theprepperpodcast.com/Stitcher, then you will be able to find my podcast on iTunes or on Stitcher. Please go over there and give me a review. All right, let's get started. First, I'm going to start with the typical story of Thanksgiving. The typical story that you learn in all the elementary books, and you see all of the different plays and storylines and stuff like that done by the elementary students, is then in 1621, everybody showed up, everybody was hungry, and these happy Indians showed up, and they showed them how to plant corn, and they gave them turkey, and everybody sat down to a huge feast, and everybody was happy, and they shared stuff, and everybody was loving life. Everybody was happy. Happy, as they would say on Duck Dynasty. There's a little plug for you. That's not really what happened, though. The feast that they're talking about was actually a hunting party that they had with the Indians that lasted 3 days long, and there was actually no Thanksgiving that was actually given during that time. I'm sure because they were because they were the Pilgrims. They prayed and stuff like that, but there was actually no legitimate Thanksgiving that was acknowledged in any written history. All right. Now, there is a controversy around Thanksgiving. The other controversy is that there was a big genocide. And the thing is mostly I found this version of the story. It was being put out there by a lot of people that were members of the Native American community, which, guys, I actually have quite a bit of Native American in my blood. I am not full blood, but I also have a lot of Danish in me as well, but you wouldn't call me a Dane because I'm not full blood and I'm not over in Denmark. So, the other view that's being given out there is they're trying to make it a day of mourning instead of people enjoying Thanksgiving, because in 1637, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, remember that name, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, who were all Puritans, in 1637 they killed 700 Indians. They went, massacred 700 people, and that's men, women, and children. They came back, and then Governor John Winthrop of the Massachusetts Bay Colony said that it was a day of Thanksgiving because all of his volunteers showed up unharmed, unscathed, and obviously with lots of arms, because that's what they went there with, to slaughter these Indians. Now, I do not want to belittle what happened there, because it was a horrible thing. But that's not Thanksgiving. That was in 1637. That's not anywhere near when Thanksgiving was. All right, so look, guys, not to belittle your day of mourning, but your day of mourning isn't going to trump Thanksgiving. It was over 15 years later. So here is my story of the real Thanksgiving. In 1621, the Pilgrims landed and founded New Plymouth. Half of the colony was starved and got sick. All right, think about that. Over half of the colony starved and got sick. These people died. And one of these people was the governor's wife. Okay, so keep that in mind. These aren't happy times. All right, these people were not Puritans. They were separatists, which is English dissenters. All right, if you think about it in today's terms, they were enemies of the state of England. They were not considered great people. They were pathetic hunters and horrible butchers. They couldn't do jack. All right, they couldn't hunt. They couldn't prepare the meat and stuff like that. They didn't know very much about curing. These were essentially city-dwelling people. They were bad at anything survival and great at prayer. So let that be a lesson to you, that prayer is a great thing. If you have faith, that will get you through a lot. It got them through a lot. But I'm telling you that you also need to learn some survival things. All right. So they were separatists. They were pathetic hunters. They were essentially English city folk. All right. And they barely made it through their first winter alive. Now, you remember the old Squanto guy that they talk about in the regular story. And they talk about Squanto showing up with the Indians, and that's whenever they taught them how to do a bunch of stuff. Well, a part of that is true, but Squanto was actually a slave. Squanto went to England on a boat as a slave. All right, and he was one of the few people that survived slavery in England. He was the one who got smallpox and a whole bunch of other things. They had a lot of diseases while they were over there. and he came back to the homeland and got with his people again, and he knew all the languages and the mannerisms of the people in the colony. So he, even though he came back from slavery, he taught them how to hunt game, how to fish cod, how to trap for hides, and grow corn. So Squanto was a pretty cool guy. He didn't hold a whole lot against them. This tied into the 1621 period, okay? So that portion of the story is actually relatively accurate. In 1621, Squanto helped them learn how to do these things. Okay, their system was set up as a communist system, believe it or not. They decided that they were going to allot land. They were going to share the land and the production from all of their crops. Okay, the harvest was going to be shared in common. Okay, it did not work very well. By 1623, they realized it wasn't working. It was failing big. They could not figure out why in the world it was failing. So, like all government, they held a meeting. But this was a localized government, so the meeting actually did some good. Okay, they decided that sharing the land and the production was not a great thing, because what's happening is all of the young, strong, strapping people decided that they weren't going to work harder than everybody else, so that all of their production is being taken up by the people who were not working very well. So, I mean, it's kind of like a lot of the stuff today, if you think about it. Working and paying your taxes, and then your taxes get allocated to other people that live on welfare. Now, I'm not talking about people who legitimately need the welfare, but you know that there are people that abuse the system, and that's what I'm talking about. Well, this is what they dealt with. There were people that were lazy and weak and abused the system of shared production. Well, they decided in this meeting in 1623 that they were no longer going to share the production. Everybody was allotted the land for the numbers in their family, but they were not required to share production of the land. So it was shared land, but not shared production. And this was a raging success. These guys, they were I mean, all the people that were willing to give or were willing to work hard, they gained a lot. They got a lot of crops and things like that. And that's the thing, is in a system like this where you're allowed to reap the benefits of what you're sowing, no pun intended, but you're allowed to reap what you sow, then you allow people that are gracious and giving to actually give to all of the people that are lacking. If you see a need, you feel the need because it makes you feel good. But by having a system where everybody has to share in common, you take away people's ability to give and to feel good about giving, and you replace it with a system of welfare where everybody's fat, weak, and lazy. So, the communist system did not work, but the new system was a raging success. That was until there was a drought. There was a drought, and they didn't think that their harvest was actually going to come that first year. And it really, really sucked for them. So everything was weak, and nothing looked like it was going to produce. They were starting to have a dwindling food supply, and they didn't think anything was going to last. So that actually pushed them into an observance that they called an observance of humiliation, which is prayer and fasting. Remember, these are Christian folk, so prayer and fasting is a very religious thing where you are giving up something that is very near and dear to your heart, because you believe that that sacrifice pleases God and your prayer will be heard better. That is a Christian thing. All right. So, after each of these prayer and fasting sessions, which could last a day or two, they had one decent-sized meal after each one. All right, and as food dwindled more and more and more, and the colony could see that, they became more frequent. They started prayer and fasting a lot more frequently, having meals afterward. All right, this is another thing that people think was the real story of Thanksgiving. All right, but after one of these, when they're really getting into the prayer and fasting quite frequently, they actually had a 14-day rain that just, after this 14-day rain, after that drought, all of these plants are like, hurting for nutrients and things like that. They had a 14-day rain, and all the crops flourished. They revived. They started producing because they were already in a hurt state. And once they saw that rain, they soaked that crap up, and they just bloomed. Everything was really, really good, and they ended up having a huge harvest. They attributed this harvest to God because they had been doing the prayer and fasting with patience and endurance. So they attributed it to God. So on November 29th, 1623, Governor Bradford proclaimed a day of thanksgiving. November 29th, 1623, a day of thanksgiving was proclaimed by Governor Bradford of the New Plymouth Colony. In my opinion, based on all the facts that I've given you, this is my belief, which is the real Thanksgiving. There was no sharing of food with the natives. This was purely the colony, and it was the first Thanksgiving documented under civil authority. This is the one that I feel is real. Okay? And I'm going to get to the reason why this is important, why we should not overlook this aspect of Thanksgiving, because there are a lot of lessons learned. Well, I'm going to real quick go into just a little historical stuff. So just be patient with me, and then I'll get into the lessons learned. I'm going to go into the national observances of Thanksgiving. So John Hanson, who was president of the Continental Congress on October 11th, 1782, declared that the fourth Thursday of every November was to be Thanksgiving Day. Then, September 25th, 1789. All right, so this is 7 years later. Congressman Elias Boudinot from New Jersey, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, proposed that the House and the Senate jointly request of President Washington to proclaim a day of Thanksgiving for, quote, the many signal favors of the Almighty God, end quote, one day after the House of Reps voted to recommend the First Amendment of the newly drafted Constitution of the United States for ratification. So one day after the House of Representatives voted to recommend the First Amendment to the Constitution for ratification, they had a day of Thanksgiving. This was September 25th, 1789. October 3rd, 1789. Once again, not November, is it? But October 3rd, 1789, George Washington created the first Thanksgiving Day designated by the national government of the United States of America. So that was just a real quick national history beyond like the real story. I just wanted to kind of throw that in there. It's nice to know some of the history of our nation, since it is our nation, and you need to know history because that's where we learn. Speaking of learning, that is the perfect segue into the lessons learned from the real Thanksgiving and why we should not overlook the real Thanksgiving story and just go with the story that the children tell us in their plays. So lesson number 1 is that communism does not work. People are lazy and selfish and will take advantage of any chance of not working. I'm not discluding myself or my family, even though we have something in our, we have this whole survivalist thing going on, so it requires us to do work to prepare. But if you really think about it, it's so that we have less that we have to do if something goes wrong. People are lazy and selfish. They will take advantage of the system, and they do not want to work for someone else's gain. They want to work for their own gain. They don't want to work for the gain of others, which is much like the modern day welfare system when people are taking advantage of it. But what people are also, which is a great thing, is they are very gracious and very giving most of the time. People give when they see a need because it makes them feel good. Okay? You give because it makes you feel good about yourself and about what you're doing. I don't care if you do the whole, well, God says to give, God says this, or it's the right thing to do socially is to give. People give because they feel good about it. Whether that's wrapped in a political envelope, if that's wrapped in a religious envelope or a social envelope, people give because it feels good. And that's not a bad thing. It would feel bad if it was a bad thing. People are meant to feel good when they give to other people when they see a need. So, Russia screwed up as well. We all know communist Russia screwed up, and it was a lot harder on them because the population of New Plymouth was so small that that they could turn their mistakes around quickly and effectively. So the shared land worked, but the shared gain did not. And that, once again, is because of how small they were. The shared land is kind of a hard thing to work out in a nationwide thing. That would be very difficult to do, and it would probably not be a very good system. But the big key here is the shared gain did not work. Now, I know that there are a lot of little communities popping up all over the place. And the ones that I see that are thriving, and I know several of them, and I'm friends with people that are in them, the ones that are thriving are the ones that they have people, they either share land or they don't share land. That part isn't the really important part, but a lot of them do share land. They're allotted a certain amount of land, but they are allowed to do whatever they want to with the land. They are allowed to get whatever gain they want from the land, and if they don't want to work the land, then they don't have to, but they better have a job outside the community to allow them to support themselves. All right, so communism doesn't work, and guess what our new governmental system is starting to resemble? We can call it a neo-fascist government, which is not a fascist government where the government takes control of the business, but a neo-fascist government where the businesses take control of the government. That is what we're dealing with now. But the system that is run by the government is starting to resemble that of communism. We should, sorry about that. Lesson number 2 is we should all be prepared for the rough times ahead, just like the Pilgrims had. We don't know what's ever going to happen, but we should do things to prepare. We should learn new skills. We should know how to hunt, fish, trap, build, and much, much more. Today, if I have time, I'm actually doing something that I think is just a real cool project, and maybe I'll post some pictures on cleversurvivalist.com, which is my blog. But I'm actually going to be doing a DIY project, and I'm going to be cutting a soda can in half and making a burner out of it. Now, what I'm talking about is like a cook stove burner out of that and alcohol. So hopefully that'll turn out well. Hopefully I'll get the time to do that today. But these little things, you think, oh, that's kind of cool, but ultimately they are providing me with skills and knowledge that I need to make things and to survive. Okay? So, I want everyone to learn how to do the necessary things for survival. Half of the separatist population died in the first year because they had no idea what they were doing. If you ever end up in a situation with minimal or no support, it would do you well to be self-sufficient, self-reliant. Lesson number 3. If hard times hit, it would be a good idea to have a small community or a neighborhood of like-minded people that can work to a common goal of sustainability and survival. This includes people that have the necessary skills and people that are generous. So you're going to want somebody, if you plan on being a community that has power, you're going to want somebody who knows electricity and somebody who knows alternative energy. You're going to need somebody who is good with security. There are a lot of different skills necessary to make something thrive. And you're going to want a community of diverse skills, people who can give and take, all right? People that can barter their skills with other people so that they can get what they need. That's how the whole system goes. It's a system of bartering and a system of borrowing skilled labor. So, anyways, that is the end of this podcast. All right. Remember, you can find my show notes at theprepperpodcast.com/009. My call to action for you guys. Number 1, go to iTunes and give me a review and a comment. The next one, learn a new self-reliant skill this holiday weekend. It doesn't have to be anything big. One small thing will suffice, because the other call to action is to spend tons of time with the family. I am recording this early so that I can spend time with my family. Spend lots of time with them. And if you're single, then go and give to a charity that is needy. I believe in charity. We have in the past given turkeys out for charity for people who don't have anything. So that's what we do as a family a lot of times. So I do believe in charity, and I want people to learn to be charitable. So learn it early while you're single. All right? Well, this has been a great episode, and I've had a lot of fun doing this one. I hope that you guys will listen to this episode 9 of the Prepper Podcast, which will probably be pieced together in other episodes later on. So I've had a lot of fun. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you continue to listen, and I'm gonna call it a day. This is Ken Jensen of theprepperpodcast.com. You guys have a great holiday weekend. Goodbye.